Okay, so as you can see, we are going to take a look at Azure Data Explorer. Previously, we looked at how to set up cluster and database. Then we looked at how to ingest data. Now we will take a look at how to use Azure Data Explorer and then run queries on that uploaded data. So the thing is, we have to do few things. First thing we will do is we will click on create a resource and then we will search for Azure Data Explorer. You can also access it from dataexplorer.azure.com and then sign in, but it helps if you create the resource from your typical Azure portal. So here we will use Azure Data Explorer, right, and hit enter. Now here if we click on it and choose create, it will basically create a marketplace instance. It's a cluster nonetheless. It will require few things from you like free trial subscription, in my case resource group, then cluster name, my cluster DB, then the region, then workload. I'm going to choose dev test and everything will be sorted on its own. Then next thing would be to scaling this with manual scale. I will choose the instance count to 1. Then comes configuration, which I can turn on and off, right? Streaming ingestion, enable purge, auto stop cluster, and so on. Then comes security, which I can again turn on and off. Where you see security is double encryption, I can set to off. This encryption I can set to off. Then comes tenant permission, can use my own tenant only. System assigned identity I can turn on. Then comes user assigned identity, I can set to on or off. Then comes network option, where you can see connectivity method is set to public. Then comes diagnostic setting, which I can disable and move to tags. Right now this is where I'm going to sort with tags, and if not, I will move to next stage. Here validation will happen and finally I can create the cluster, right? Make sure validation is passed. Then you have your cluster that looks like this, right? So here few things are important. First thing is your URI. This is the URI which we will be connecting to our cluster connection for ingesting the data. So this connection is what we need. First thing we need is, in getting started, you will require to create a database. You can also create that from database page. So we have cluster, then we have database. So clicking on add database, you will find option to add database. Then retention days, let's put it for 7 days of retention and cache. Then click create, right? That should do the work. Next thing, once you have your database, next thing you will do is establish the connection from this database to your Azure Data Explorer for ingesting the data, right? So click on this data tab here, then we will be clicking on ingest data here, or even from our Azure cluster, and then click on getting started, where you see data ingestion. Click on that ingest button, right, where you will have to give it a blob storage. And when I say blob storage, you will have to manually create one storage account, right? So I will show you the storage account where I have created that. So I created my store DB, and this is the account we need for handling our ingested data, right? Now when you create that particular storage account, click on ingest and it will open up Azure Data Explorer. Then it will start loading. It will connect to your cluster, connect to your database, and also you can create a new table here, right? Once you do that, it will move to let's see my table 2. We will go for source where we can choose blob or container, sorry, where we choose file, and where we can also upload our CSV file, right? Then there is only blob option, that is where I can paste the URL, and then we will push ahead, right? So if I post the URL here for choosing the blob, this blob will be stored in my storage account, right? Now next thing, click schema, accept the uncompressed compression type, data format CSV, mapping name my table to mapping, then click start ingestion, and it will create that table, add the data, and you will find the data here within your table, right? So we can also check the dashboard with all the available options, right? Alternatively, you can also click on my cluster where you can create cluster and database, but it will still require connection from this side of Azure. So it's better to create the database here, also create storage account, and then basically ingest data with the URL, right? Now I can directly use query so that you can get the idea how to use the queries. Okay, now whenever you want to run a query, always pay attention to your table. So we will start from here. We will give it my table. In the next line, you will notice that there is sort, then by. Here I can use various options like when the storm was started. So I will use start time, and in descending order. In next line, however, I will pick take 10 of that data. If I run this query, it will show me when the storm was started, show in descendant order of their start time and rest of their data along with 10 of those rows out of these queries. I can also replace this by making use of, let's say, deaths direct, and if we run this, that would also show us the respective data. So like this, I can manipulate variety of values and explore my data on Azure Data Explorer. So what we have done so far here, I can explain to you. I created a cluster, I created a database, then I created my queries in query editor, right? So this is the process that we are going to follow in order to get queries run in the Azure Data Explorer. It may take a bit of your time, but follow the process. You can also run few more queries if you want, so that you can get the idea how exactly these queries work, why it doesn't look like typical SQL or so, right? And why all of these uh, areas showing their properties as real string and so on. I can cover that too if you want. Okay, so let's cover that part. The type of columns that you see here are showing their column data type. So start time is date time, then event ID, etc. are like long, some are string. They are basically your columns within your table. That's why they are showing that within the bracket. Also, why we are choosing it like this, the type of queries we run in Data Explorer is it requires you to mention the table name, then you narrow down to what you want and for which query you want. So some we can use sort by or take 10, then we can use where. So those keyword will be used to sort that part out of your tables, right? So we are practically narrowing down our queries to get the exact data that we want. Let's see if I want ascending, so I will basically use ASC. It will also help you with auto completion, so you are able to run this properly, right? And there you go, you got your data in ascending way. You can also experiment with multiple search with, let's say, let's direct, then we can add one more thing. Let's use something like damaged property, and I want to sort this ascending way. So run that and you will get that as well. So within that particular storm event, we are filtering with death and damage, right? So we can also see if there is any other strong parameter, right, like injuries. So we'll add one more comma and we use injury direct. Run. When you do that, it will also show you again ascending order for that sort of damage, and you can then again switch to descending and then experiment with that. That also works, but you get the idea how these queries are run. You can play around with this. Now my condition was that was storm events data. You can find that, or alternatively you can use any GitHub data set while ingesting your data into the database, right? So I hope you get the idea how Azure Data Explorer works, how the query editor works, how queries are run in Azure Data Explorer.